All right, everybody, we are going to do a tutorial here based on the work of an artist named David Hockney, who did some experimentation with taking multiple photographs of the same object from slightly different angles and then sort of combining them into collages. And you can see some examples of his work here. It's kind of interesting and just a cool effect. So we're going to do something similar in Photoshop. We're not going to use multiple images, but we're going to create multiple images out of the same source image is what we're going to do. So we're going to take an image that looks like this and turn it into an image that kind of looks like this. That is the plan. So for my image, or the image that you download, I just want to talk about a couple of things here when you download one. So when you download your image, go into image size. Notice the size of my image is 3200 by 2133. I'm actually going to change the size of this image to make the width 1000. If your image is larger than this, I suggest you do this step as well, because then all of the values that I give you for the different layer styles and selections we're going to do will work for your image. If your image is smaller than 1000, you probably should not make it larger because then it will pixelate. But in either case, you might need to change some of these values a little bit to fit your image size. But if you start with an image that has a width of 1000, then you should be just fine. Now I want you to notice, because this little lock is connecting width and height, when I change the value of my width, the height will automatically change to stay in proportion. If that lock is not on, turn it on by clicking on it. So I'm going to make the width 1000 and click OK. Now it's going to look like my image shrank here, but it really didn't. It's just showing it at 33.3%. So I'm just going to zoom it up to 100% and everything will be just fine. Now notice that my image, I've opened it and it's opened as a background layer, which is locked, which means you can't edit it. But this is a good thing because when you're working in Photoshop, you should always have your original untouched, so you don't have to worry about destroying it or losing anything. You might damage the file and you can't get the original back. So I'm just going to leave that alone, and what I'm going to do is click and drag and create a new layer, duplicate that layer. It'll be called background copy. I'm going to turn off the visibility of the background, and I'm never going to touch the background copy during this tutorial or at any point in the future. I'm just going to call this the original now. I just double clicked on the name right there. For this project, we're going to want to add a layer, just a blank layer, and we're going to want to fill it with white. So notice I'm on layer 1. I'm going to go over to my paint bucket, make sure I select the paint bucket. I'm going to make sure white is my foreground color. If it's not, if it's black and white, I can click the little curvy arrow to switch them. If there's other colors here, click the little black and white squares just above that and it'll reset it, and then make sure white is the foreground color, the one that's in front. And then I'm just going to hit the Alt key and backspace, and that's going to fill layer 1 with white, and then I'm just going to move it underneath my original. Okay, now I'm going to select the original layer, and I'm going to do two things right now, but it's not going to appear I did anything until the next step after I do this. You'll see what I mean in just a minute. So with the original layer selected, I'm going to go down to the bottom of the layer palette and click the FX button, and I'm going to select drop shadow, which is the bottom choice. Now I want you to notice a couple things here about this layer style window. First of all, notice that drop shadow is highlighted and checked. Checking it means it'll apply that style to the layer, and when it's highlighted, all of the values over here are related to the drop shadow. Okay, so what I want to do is keep the blend mode multiplied, the opacity 100%. I'm going to change the angle to 120 so that the light is kind of coming in from the upper left and the shadow will be on the bottom right. And then distance, spread, and size 505 should be good. Everything else on here you can just leave. You don't need to make any changes to that. The color though of the shadow should be black. So if it's not black, click on it and then choose like the very lower left of it so that that is the color. The next thing I want to do is click on stroke right here. Again, don't just click the checkbox, click the word stroke so that it's highlighted and checked. And then what I want to do here is for size, I'm going to do 5 pixels. For color, I'm going to do a dark gray. So again, these values, and by the way, it should be outside, normal, and 100% opacity. The values that I just put in for both the stroke and the drop shadow will work for my image size. If your image is bigger or smaller, you might need to adjust these values a little bit. So if your image is smaller, maybe 505 is too big, you might do 303, something like that. All right, I'm going to click OK, and again, it's going to appear that nothing happened. It did, but it won't be obvious until the next step. The next thing I'm going to do is click on the rectangular marquee. And what I want to do, and if it's not selected, just click and hold and pick that rectangular marquee. What I want to do is come over here to Style. Yours probably says Normal. We want to change this to Fixed Size. The size I'm going to use for my image is 220 width by 165 height. Again, if your image is pretty much the same size as mine, that'll be perfect. You might need to make it bigger or smaller depending on your original image size. So now here's where we're going to see the changes on these effects that we did previously. So we're going to make sure that the original layer is highlighted. Then what we're going to do is make sure we still are on the rectangular marquee. And all we need to do now is click. Because we set the width and the height to be 220 by 165, the rectangular marquee, when we click, is always going to be 220 by 165. When you click and put it in, you can then click and drag inside of it to move it around. And I'm just going to put this right over the face of Kareem Hunt in this picture. And then this is where you're going to start to see how this effect works. So what I want to do again is make sure that my original layer is selected. And I'm going to hold down the Control key and hit the letter J. What Control J does is it makes a copy of the image that you're on and puts it above in the layers palette. But since we had a selection there, Control J is only going to duplicate the part that was selected. So you can see how it just duplicated this part around his face right here. And again, notice we have the border, which was the color that we selected, and there's a drop shadow as well in the lower right. Okay, so now what you're going to do is you're just going to repeat this process a number of times for your image to end up sort of getting the main parts of your image that we're going to then apply some different effects to. Now, the biggest mistake or the most likely mistake you're going to make in this is you're going to forget that between each step, you need to go back and highlight your original layer and then click with the rectangular marquee and then do Control J. So just keep repeating this step by clicking and moving things around, and you're just trying to build a collage of these frames that we will then do some cool stuff with towards the end. But the key is always make sure you go back to the original when you click and hit Control J. If you are, for example, if I forget and I stay on layer 6 and click here and hit Control J, it's going to tell me that there's nothing for me to select because it's basically empty there. So you need to be sure that you're back on the original. So just keep repeating this process until you have kind of your area filled. Now, I want to point out something to you here. You can see how the layers palette is getting pretty big. Because there's layers effect applied to all these, you can see how each layer is kind of wide. You can minimize each layer by hitting the arrows that are next to them to sort of make it a little bit easier for you to work if you need to. Okay, so I'm going to pause the video and then finish this one and then come back once I've got everything selected. All right, so I think I have enough here. I probably will end up adding a couple of more, but here's the thing. When you have, it's hard to tell if you've done a good enough job until you turn off the original layer and let the white background show underneath. So I'm going to click the visibility icon next to the original layer, and then I'll be able to sort of tell, like, okay, I think I might need something in the middle here. You know, it'll just be sort of an artistic choice that you'll have to make. So what I'll do is I'll turn the original layer back on. I think I want something right here, so I'm going to hit Control J there, turn the original off and see if I like it, and go from there. But I'm going to say for this, I'm okay with this. You might decide that you want a little bit more. All right, so now here's where some of the cool stuff is going to happen here. So you're going to choose your Move tool, the top one right here. You're going to make sure that Auto Select is checked, because this is going to make your life much easier. Because when you're creating all these layers, we don't need to name them. We're just going to, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, that's fine. So you might not know which layer is this part of the image right here, or Nick Chubb's face, or his arm, or whatever. So going through and hunting for that would be kind of frustrating. When you have the Move tool on and Auto Select selected, anything you click on will automatically be selected in the layer palette. So notice, apparently Nick Chubb's face is layer 3. Kareem Hunt's arm is layer 6. Do you see how it's changing over there? So what you want to do now is you want to click on some of these layers, and when you have a layer selected, you're going to hit Control-T using the Transform tool, and then you're going to hover outside of a corner so that your arrow is curvy, and you're going to start to just sort of take some images and rotate them around. So I just clicked on the face there. I'm going to hit Control-T. So almost like these are photographs laying on top of each other that are building up a particular image. And again, this is complete and total artistic choice. There's really no right or wrong. If you do something and you don't love it, then just hit undo, or in your history palette, go back around and change that and get it the way that you want it. Okay, so I would mess around with this a little bit more, but I'm going to move on to show you now how we can make this look even cooler. So I don't love this white background, and we're not going to turn the original back on because that's going to ruin the effect. So we're going to take this white background and make it a little bit more interesting. So I'm going to make sure I select layer 1, which is the white background. I'm going to go over to where my paint bucket is and change that to the gradient tool. Up at the top, I'm going to let you decide what you like, but I like to do the first choice here, which is the regular gradient. There's a few other choices that you could play around with and see if you like them or not. We're going to make sure that you should just see a white to black here, but we're going to end up changing those colors. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on my foreground color, and then I'm going to use my paint dropper, and I'm going to select an orange from the picture and click OK. And then I'm going to click on my background color, and I'm going to select kind of a dark brown from the picture, maybe from over here, and then click OK. And what I'm going to, and now notice here, it's changed where you can see it's going from orange to like a darker brown. And what I'm going to do with my gradient tool selected is I'm just going to click, hold, and drag in any direction I want and let go. And that's going to fill in that layer with that color. Now the way the gradient works is if you do a really long drag, it will be a gradual change. If you do a short drag, it'll be a really sharp change. So again, play around with what you like. You can try some of these other gradients here, like circular gradients and vector gradients or whatever it's called. I actually don't even know what it's called. But I don't really like, personally, those are not my favorites. So I like just something like this. And again, you can even drag from inside to outside and really make it a gradual change with it right there. So that's good. I'm happy with that right now. The last thing that we're going to do is we're going to put a nice border around this image. So I'm going to scroll up and click on the top layer, and then just add another layer above that, just a blank layer. I'm going to do Control-A for Select All. Then I'm going to go to Select Modify, and I'm going to go Contract. 20 pixels works for my image size, but again, you would have to decide what works for yours. But basically, we're just putting like a border around this. So you can see by contracting it how it shrunk in from the edges. But what I need to do is select the inverse now, because right now everything inside this box is selected and I only want the outer part selected. So I'm going to go Select Inverse, and now you can see I have the outer edge selected. I'm going to change to my paint bucket, and I'm going to choose a color. I'm just going to go ahead and do the orange right here. Maybe I'll just do a slightly different orange, maybe like a little darker. And then just going to make sure that I am inside of the you can see the little cursor. You want that to be inside where you want to dump the paint, and just click it, and it dumped it right in there. If you aren't careful and dump it outside of the selection, it's still going to go inside the selection because that's all. You can't dump anything in an area that's not selected. I'm going to hit Control-D to deselect, and there we go. That is my completed image ready to be turned in right now. Good job, everybody. I hope you followed along well and hope you enjoyed it. Let's see the cool stuff that you can come up with.